It's been 12 months since a quill.
However, I attended several universities because I was on active duty at the time.
And following your undergraduate, where did you go?
From there, I went and completed my tour on active duty. I went into work in the field and eventually then did my master's in computer forensics from George Mason University.
So when about was it that you received your master's in computer forensics from George Mason?
I received my master's, I believe, 2014.
He is a dirty Boston lawyer, and his arguments are lame. He's trying to squash all of our experts, as he has no case to claim. He should have won an Oscar medal to convince the court he's sane. He can lie without a conscience and keep that smirk upon his face. I bet he wears those silky undies, the ones with edging made of lace. And Judge Beverly Academy is so biased for the state, is wading through 100 motions in a rush to seal my fate. So you can bring in Massachusetts, cause we all ain't got no quit. And we all know that the truth is my car is not the thing John hit.
And as far as, you mentioned that you had started working a little bit post-military, but before going to grad school, is that right?
Correct. I started working in digital forensics in 2010.
And where did you begin when you started working in 2010?
I was a contractor for a company called American Systems, working at the Terrorist Explosive Device Analytical Center, called TDAC.
And following, sort of going forward to when you received your graduate degree, if you could speak a little bit about your work history since then.
Sure. So I continued to work at TDAC while I had completed my degree. That was doing digital forensic analysis on phones that were connected to improvised explosive devices. So most of the phones I received was post-blast, and I would recover data from that and analyze that. From there, once I had completed my degree, I went and worked in the regular private sector. I worked for Ernst & Young, now called EY. There I was one of their mobile forensics experts, working a variety of cases, everything from insider threat and insider trading. Then I really missed doing more public service work. So I left to go to the National Media Exploitation Center, which is I work there as a contractor under a company called Basis Technology. That organization supports 22 government agencies in the intelligence community, supporting the things that are either the highest priority or the things that other organizations can't support. So we were the center of excellence for the U.S. government in mobile exploitation, and I ran that team there.
Yeah. And then
from there, I can go from there. From there, I went and became the director of forensics for Magnet Forensics, which is a company that develops tools for digital forensics. So there I was in a position where I did a large amount of research into new artifacts, unsupported access to devices, et cetera. I was there for 5 years before starting my own firm.
And then what did you, no, I'm sorry, let me start again. As far as what, if any, teaching experience in relation to this?
That is an excellent question. I've actually been an adjunct professor at George Mason University since 2016. I've taught 20 terms in their graduate program. I teach the mobile forensic analysis course in their digital forensics master's program.
In addition to your work and your teaching and all your training, are there any professional organizations related to your field that you're a member of?
Actually, several. I am a member of the Organizational Scientific Area Committee on Digital Evidence, which is a part of NIST, the National Institute of Science Technology. I am a member of the Scientific Working Group on Digital Evidence, also called HYDE. I am the chair of a project called DFIR Review that does peer review of academic work that's done by practitioners in the form of blogs. I've been chairing that project since 2018, when it started, with our first publications in 2019. I am the first VP at the International Executive Committee level of the High Tech Crime Investigation Association, also called HTCIA, which I've been a member of since 2012. And I will ascend to, I've been elected, I'll ascend to president next September. I am also, I do a lot of volunteer work. I also am an associate member of the American Academy of Forensic Sciences, AAFS. And I just recently finished my term as an associate editor for Forensic Science International Digital Investigations, which is a peer-reviewed journal in the academic space of digital forensics. And I'm still a reviewer, but I stepped down from my duties as an associate editor.
Bringing me to my next question, what, if any, sort of articles or publications have you published in relation to?
Great question. I've published a paper on the standardization of data recovery. I worked on that with Dr. Owen Casey and Dr. Nelson. That was published in Forensic Science International Digital Investigations Journal. I also was the second author on a paper related to the use of AI in digital forensics, artificial intelligence, and I've published numerous articles, blogs, white papers. I've probably published about 20 of those, but just speaking to the peer review work, there's 2.
When you say peer review, can you explain to the jury a little bit about what that means and what that process entails?
Absolutely. So a peer-reviewed work is when you have a novel piece of research that you then submit that novel, never been presented work to a journal. It then gets reviewed by numerous academic peers. It goes through cycles of revision where they ask more questions. On the standardization of file recovery paper, that process took about 14 months for it to be peer-reviewed by experts in the field, and then it is published in a journal.
So you've had both articles that...
We just went from 6 to 1. Listen to this woman. All right, sweetheart. No worries. I'm going to run it as a sleep stream anyway. So have a freaking awesome Easter. Okay. Much love. Love you all. Love you guts. Bye-bye. Listen to Jessica Hyde.
that you've authored that have been peer-reviewed and published, as well as you've performed the role of reviewer of other people's work?
Correct. I performed in addition to the publications I've done, I reviewed at least 20 to 30 articles, both in a combination of support for Forensic Science International Digital Investigations Journal and DFIR review.
Now, Ms. Hyde, if you could explain to the jury, when you say the term as far as digital forensics, what do you understand that term to mean with relation to what you do?
I would describe digital forensics as the analysis of data from any storage medium that can control data, be that a mobile phone, computer, or cloud, for the intention of that data intentionally being used for court.
And with reference to your firm, HYDE, where is that located? What state?
We are headquartered in New York State, in Bridgeport, New York, which is outside of Syracuse. We also have an office location in the DC metro area in Tyson's Corner, but we have employees in 6 states.
And with respect to your duties and responsibilities in regards to your firm, what is it that you do?
Great question. So I do perform digital forensic analysis on cases. I currently work on 2 U.S. government contracts supporting 1 digital forensic analysis and 2 novel research and exploitation of mobile devices. So I'm named personnel on 2 contracts, and then I manage another 3. I also develop training for mobile forensics. My courses have been taken by people all over the country, and HYDE also delivers that training. I also do research and presentations for journals, conferences, et cetera. So a combination of casework, education, and research.
Now, Ms. Hyde, if I could turn your attention to May of 2023. At some point during that month, were you contacted by the Norfolk District Attorney's Office in relation to this case?
Yes, on May 4th, I was contacted by Detective Tully via our website about this case.
And eventually, was there a contract that was executed and you agreed to do some work in relation to one specific area of this case?
Yes, a contract was executed on May 9th and work began on May 10th of 2023.
And as far as the specific information in relation to this case, what was it that you looked at? Let me start by saying, what was it that you were asked to look at?
I was asked to look at 2 specific Google search terms that took place on January 29th.
And with regards to the information that was provided, and we'll get to that in a moment, but with respect to the question that was asked, was it a question that was posed, or were you asked to find some sort of specific response?
I was asked to look at the timelines and timestamps related to those Google searches.
Now, with regard to what, if anything, was then provided to you, or what, if anything, did you review in the course of your analysis?
I received 2 reports. I received the affidavit from Richard Green, and I received the report from Trooper, I don't want to butcher his name, but something along the lines of Nicholas Garino.
Perfect.
Oh, good.
And is it your understanding that Mr. Green was a person that was retained by the defense in this case?
Yes, I was aware of that.
So you essentially received reports from the state police and a witness for the defense, correct?
That is correct.
In addition to those 2 reports, what, if anything else, did you receive in relation to your analysis?
On May 10th, I received via U.S. Postal Mail a copy of the drive with data from a phone that was identified to me as belonging to Jennifer McCabe. It was a full file system extraction from a gray key.
And So when you received that information, what, if anything, did you do with it?
The first thing I did with that data set after having been retained was I made a forensic copy. I used an ArcPoint Atrio to copy the data from that original disk, which was then placed in our safe, to a working copy drive.
And that ArcPoint Atrio, what is that?
It's a forensics tool that does extraction and duplication.
And then once that process was completed, what did you do?
I immediately verified the hash values of my new image to make sure that it matched the hash value of the original image.
And what is the hash value?
A hash value is an algorithmic numerical representation of the data. So when you have a hash value, that value is unique to a certain set of data. So when you have that same hash value matching, you're ensuring that your copy that you made was correct and not in any way damaged or corrupt.
And as far as matching those hash values, were you able to do so?
Yes, the hash values of both the copy I made to work from and the original matched. They also matched the document that came along with the drive stating the original hash value.
And then what did you do from there?
From there, I processed the image in several forensics tools. I used Celebrite Physical Analyzer. I used Magnet Axiom. I used a tool called ARTX, ARTEX. I utilized a tool called iLeap, and I later used a tool called Sanderson Forensics SQLite, but I did not use that tool at this point.
Now, with reference to the tools that you used, that you just went through, are those fairly common tools, or are those tools that are commonly used within your industry?
Yes, they are commonly used digital forensics tools that are very standard for other forensics examiners to use on mobile exploitation.
And as far as those different types of tools, so I guess my question is, there were a variety of different tools that you used.
Correct.
And why were you using the different tools?
So different forensics tools have different capabilities and look at data a little bit differently. Phones have thousands of applications. If you look at the Apple Store or the Google Play Store, you can download a total of 6 million apps between the two. Commercial forensics tools, they can only support so many applications, so they each work and support different bits of data. So it's important to use multiple tools so you can see the results from different data sets and be able to compare those results and enhance those with manual analysis.
And with respect to using those sort of different variety of tools from Celebrite to Axiom to ARTX, et cetera, is that something that you typically do as far as your normal process of conducting a forensic analysis? Yeah,
that's very, very typical for me to process with multiple tools to ensure that I'm getting the most complete interpretations from forensics tools. Of course, you go beyond that with your analysis, but it's absolutely pertinent to do that. I would run some of those tools before others because of speed, and so I can begin analysis while other tools are running.
And if I could ask you just about the last one that you mentioned, just briefly, as far as the Sanderson tool.
Yes.
Can you explain to the jury sort of what that is and how that interplays with the other tools and analysis?
The Sanderson tool is meant to look at a specific type of data structure called a SQLite database. SQLite databases are very nuanced, and this particular tool allows you to take that database and explore it at a deeper level than the other forensics tools allow.
And just for the record, when you use that term as far as a SQLite database, how is that spelled?
It is capital SQL, lowercase ITE, and SQLite is also commonly pronounced as SQLite, so both pronunciations are acceptable.
Now, once you receive the extraction, made a copy, and then ran it through of those variety of tools, what is it that you specifically were looking at, and what is it that you were trying to ascertain, or the question that you were trying to answer?
So in looking at that analysis, I was focused specifically on the data that took place on January 29th. So the first thing I did was I limited my search within those tools to that period, and I looked at the artifacts that they were parsing pertaining to Safari history, as Safari was the browser that had been in use at that time.
Now, in addition to looking at those search, what, if any, information were you looking at in relation to deletion?
I'm sorry, I could not hear you.
In addition to looking at those materials as far as those searches were concerned, what, if anything else, were you looking at regarding that data with respect to deletion?
I didn't hear the last word. With respect to?
Deletion.
Deletion. I apologize. Thank you. Yeah, so one of the things that was asked, one of the things that was actually in the affidavit from Richard Green was that it was stated that there was belief that one of the search terms had been deleted. So I was specifically looking at that search term to see what the reason was for the suspicion of deletion. There is the tools denote things based on how they are running as an automatic process. The tools are designed to parse through large amounts of data to make it easier. So the tools will often flag certain data as recovered. And sometimes there is confusion between what recovery and deletion means. That actually was the subject of the paper I referenced earlier that I co-authored. And the tools are sometimes misinterpreted that that statement of recovery means deletion. So I was exploring that.
Now, you mentioned specifically there were two searches of interest that you were exploring. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And what were those two searches, and what, if any, information did you have in relation to them?
I had the information from the two reports that had been written in terms of what they found. And the two search terms, one was HOS, H-O-S, long to die in cold, and the other one was how long T-I, die in C-L-K-D.
And what, if any, information from your, starting, if you could, sort of walk the jury through as far as your analysis, what you first observed, and what your analysis consisted of as it evolved?
Absolutely. So when I first looked at it, some of the tools surfaced the data from a specific storage called the, I'll just make sure I get the entire path for you, com.apple.mobile Safari plist. It is very common in mobile devices for it to look like a reverse domain name. Like you normally would go to a site like CNN.com. Typically, those names are like the opposite. So com.apple is going to be representative of a native Apple application. So this particular plist was related to that. A plist is, or called a property list, is a data structure that's unique to Apple devices. And there is data pertaining to Google search, not just Google searches, search history that's stored there. There's also, I found evidence of the search terms in Knowledge CDB. The Knowledge C database is an Apple database that is meant to store information about users so it can determine future functionality, what you're looking for, et cetera. So that's the Knowledge CDB. It's more of a system level artifact. And then there was also, and these were the observed search terms, and most of the tools picked up both of those search terms in there. Not all tools did pick up the one that was from the wall, which was the instance of Hoslong to die in cold. That's how I'm pronouncing the HOS. If you would like me to clarify it a different way, that's fine. That particular search term was recovered from a SQLite database, the one I later explored, and Celebrite specifically demonstrated and showed that particular search term as a suspended state tab. And that's a really intricate artifact whenever we're ready to explore that. That is the one that was marked as recovered. So those were my initial findings, just looking at what the automated tools parse. However, Celebrite was the tool that found that particular search term.
Oh. Now, you used a term in there as far as a wall or a write-ahead log file. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Can you please explain to the jury what your understanding of that term is based on your training experience?
Absolutely. This is a really interesting data structure, the way it works. So the way SQLite databases work is the data before being committed to the database, which is almost like an Excel spreadsheet if you think about that. Each table is like a page on an Excel spreadsheet. The data before going there goes kind of to almost like a text file, like if you were to have a doc, of writing all the changes that need to happen to that Excel spreadsheet. And they're not made to that spreadsheet until it closes. So what happens is as you're doing things, either adding a website by searching for it, or closing a tab or deleting a text message in a SQLite database in general, both things you add are written to that text document or things you delete. So they all hang out there together. So it's any changes that are going to be made since you started using that application until it's closed, then they change there and then it reopens. So to make an analogy, if you're in a restaurant and you order some food, the food being the data, and you at the table being the table that the data is going to. When you request that data and you say, I'm adding it, it goes to the area where the waiter or waitress or server is going to grab it from, right? That warming station. That is almost like our write-ahead log. And so different tables are ordering food, and food is constantly being put there. If somebody, maybe their steak came out rare and it needs to be cooked more, when they send it back, it'll also go to that warming area. So you can see there that you've got things waiting to go out to the tables and things being sent back to the kitchen. So simultaneously, that storage area contains both the newest stuff waiting to go out and the stuff coming back. And that's really what a wall file winds up containing: your newest Google searches, your newest text messages, et cetera, as well as anything that you've been deleted, that you've said was deleted, because the reference in there is going to be delete this entry. And so then all of those don't happen until the application is closed and reopened. If the application's been closed, when we do the extraction, we actually don't get the wall file. We only get the wall file if at the time of extraction, that database had not been closed. So that just means that Safari in this instance was still running when the extraction was done. Most of you, when you use your phones, you leave the applications up. So because of that, we have a wall file. And so that wall file is going to contain both a data that's been requested to be deleted and new data. Now, when I say deleted in this instance, I don't mean like you as a user saying delete this old text message. What I mean when I say deleted in this instance is removed from the database. So when we're talking about something like a Safari tab, deletion from the database can occur because you close the tab. We all open tabs when we use our browsers on our phone, and we all close them. And so closing in that instance would be a deletion in the database, but what that's doing is not a user requesting deletion. So I just want to be clear on that term.
And to that point, as far as, so when you say something has been deleted specifically with reference to the write-ahead log or the wall file, that's not something that's necessarily initiated by the user themselves, correct?
Correct. And I think that's a common misconception, yes.
Your Honor, just in regard to a side issue, may we approach just briefly?
Sure.
I've never heard of that, Teresia. Biofreeze. I'm tipping it's like an ice spray or something. I might have to look that up.
Would be a reference to data that's too large to store in the database, so it would be elsewhere. So that would be if your text message included, let's say, a picture or a video.
Now, in regard to your analysis and your ultimate conclusions, in this case, you wrote a report, is that correct?
That is correct.
And within that report, there are a couple of tables and a specific figure, is that correct?
That is correct.
Your Honor, with the court's permission, if I could, I'd like to publish to the jury table 1 from Ms. Hyde's report.
Okay.
Ms. Hyde, do you have a copy of your report with you as well?
I do.
Your Honor, with the court's permission, just because I fear it may be a little difficult to see from where she's seated, if she could refer to the table in her
Sure.
report.
Thank you.
Ms. Hyde, what's up on the screen, and I'm sorry, there should be a laser pointer on the desk before you. Do you see that?
I do. Oh, yes.
So using that laser pointer, if you could draw the jury's attention, or direct the jury's attention, I should say, with respect to what are we looking at in this specific case?
Absolutely. So this table here has a couple of different elements that I'm showing in terms of what searches were searched where, and when, and what source of data they came from. So if we look at this first search, I have them in the timestamp order that is associated with the artifact. I want to clarify that we need to discuss the meanings of these timestamps as we go. So this first one that you're going to see is, and I'm just going to reference my paper because of the size, is 0227 and 40 a.m. So that's 2 o'clock in the morning, 27 minutes and 40 seconds. And it is a search for the term HOF, long to die in cold. And that is timestamp in this instance is from the browser state DB, which is right here. The browser state DB is an artifact that speaks to when tabs are moved. So when you're using your browser and you open different tabs, you may have a search that this time pertains to the time that that tab moved. It could be lots of things. It could be you switch tabs. It could be you close the tab. It could be you minimize the application. Depending on the version of iOS, what can be that browser state of the tab that changes as timestamp differs. But what's very special to know about this timestamp is that that is not the time necessarily of the search. If a browser is opened and a single search is made, those will match. However, as long as that browser hasn't been closed, moved to the background, etc. If that browser has had any activity that happens to that tab in terms of application closing, minimizing, this can update. That is what that timestamp is for. This search term is always going to be the most recent search term in that tab. That means the last item that was opened in that tab was HOF long TI die and cold. We cannot tell by this particular artifact what time that search occurred. It is a high likelihood that that tab was opened at this time because there was another search that occurred at 2:27 in the morning. It was a sports site. I cannot pronounce it. It began with an H. Hockomock Sports. Hockomock. Okay, thank you very much for the pronunciation. Hockomock Sports. There were a couple of searches pertaining to that done immediately after, but it appears that that's when this tab was opened and the first search done there. So this search we know was done by this, and we know that it was the last search in the tab because it comes from this source, the browser state DB. And that means that particular timestamp and search pertains to what has happened with the tab. And that's what allows you to open your Safari browser on your iPhone and then open it on your iPad or your Mac and have the same tab. That's the function there. This search here, this is really interesting. So at 6:22:49 a.m., we have an entry in CacheDB that is specifically, if we dig into this URL, this is an Apple suggested term. So when you use a browser and you start to type a search you've never typed before, the browser tries to help you and say, are you searching for this? So as the user began to type the phrase in the immediate search after, which is how long TI to die in CKLD, this particular suggestion came up, indicating in all likeliness that the search term being typed had not previously been searched, because Apple suggested, instead of a previous search, it suggested how long does it take to digest food. After how long to digest food had been suggested, the user then has a search at that time, 6:23:51, for how long TI die in cold, and that is coming from the mobile Safari plist, the com.apple.mobile Safari plist I mentioned earlier, and the search is also shown in the knowledge CDB. That's commonly what we would expect. We would expect that search to be in both of those, both that plist and that database. Then the, yeah, absolutely.
As far as the expectation of that being in both of those, the plist and the other database, why is that?
That is because the search is not being tracked not only by the plist for Safari, but also by the system itself to be able to do that predictive coding. So in the future, when you start to type how long, it gives you what you searched last time.
And with respect to that, how long it takes to digest food, based on your analysis, was that a search term that was ever entered into this home?
Correct. The source of that, if you look at this first line where it says cdn2 smooth.apple.com, that's what indicates that this is an Apple suggested term, not a user input term.
I'm sorry, I interrupted you. If you could please continue with the next.
Absolutely. The next search that was done immediately after the search at 6:23, the next search was how long TI die in CLKD. Again, we see that search both in the Knowledge CDB and the mobile Safari plist. And then we have, so we see it in both databases. Then, so that's how long to die in cold. Sorry, I was on the next one. Then at 6:24, we get the next search, which is HOS long to die in cold. And we have that search again, both in the Knowledge CDB and the plist. If I were timelining this based on activity as opposed to timestamps associated, what I see here is the beginning of a user typing a search, Apple making a suggestion of how long to digest food. The user does not take that suggestion and rather inputs how long TI die in CKLD. They then make a second search of HOS long to die in cold. That search winds up being the last search in the tab, and that is why we see it in the this particular browser state DB. It should be noted that this is in one of those WAV files and not the raw file.
And so as far as sort of towards the top there, and I know we'll get a little more to this in a moment, but as far as that reading of 2:27:40 in the morning, as far as the timestamp associated with search, why would that timestamp be associated with it if it's searched later on in the morning?
Because that table isn't showing the time of that search. It's showing the state of the database. So it's saying that the last time that tab was touched, moved to the background or foreground, was 2:27 a.m. The website, as you search more websites in the tab, that gets updated. So the current state that this is showing is that it was, the tab was moved to the background or opened or some action for the tab at 2:27 a.m. when the Hawkmock Sports, I got it right, Hawkmock Sports website was visited. And then once the Hawkmock Sports website was visited, that tab was in continual use. There are other searches and activity that happens. We don't see, that happens eventually. This search gets made at 6:23 a.m., this search at 6:24 a.m. That winds up being the last search in the tab. And because it's the last search in the tab, that's what the final update is and the final status.
So when you say last search in the tab in reference to time, in reference to what time specifically?
I'm sorry, I don't understand the question.
That question, let me rephrase. So as far as the 2:27 tab is closed, and then another search done at 6:23, is that correct?
2:27 isn't necessarily when the time when the tab was closed. That's in my report. I say that it's undetermined because there's a lot of things that can cause that timestamp to be there, including tab being moved, tab being minimized. I don't know exactly what caused the tab to get that particular entry, but it is not, that timestamp is not indicative of the time of the search or any URL that's visited there. That time is indicative of movement of the tab, and the search is the most recent search. So they update at different times.
So I guess my question is, as far as from what your analysis is here, is there any use of that tab between, or is there any evidence or artifact of use of that tab between the 2:27 timestamp and the 6:23 timestamp?
So the fact that that timestamp exists at 2:27, combined with the fact that the only existence of this search is at 6:24, means that yes, that particular tab was used after 2:27 when the Hawkmock Sports was searched. I apologize for not being familiar with that name.
That's absolutely fine. Now, if I could ask you at this point, as you had talked about one in particular database having sort of an intricate artifact, if you could remind the jury what that is, and if you could explain that.
So the artifact that needed a little bit more explanation and digging was this browser state tab. And that's because if you look at the end of this file name, you'll see it's a db-wall. That means it wasn't in the regular database. It was in the write-ahead log. And to Celebrate's credit, that tool actually parsed the write-ahead log and displayed it where the other tools did not. If you remember before, we talked about write-ahead logs, and we talked about the fact that they can contain data that is both removed from a database and data that's not yet to be committed. And this database, we do not know which that is, but what I did was I manually went through, and that's in the figure, I manually went through and reconstructed the wall files using the Sanderson SQLite tool. And in reconstructing the wall files, I found many. I'll tell you exactly how many if I can refer to my notes.
Sure.
Refer to my notes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Approximately 16 instances of that existing in the wall file. Now, what's interesting in that figure is that each entry of something in a write-ahead log gets a unique identifier. So it gets a number, right, that makes it unique. Just like each one of us has a phone number that's unique to us, each entry in the database that starts in the write-ahead log gets its own unique identifier. And that unique identifier in this instance in all 16 entries in the wall file is the same, which shows that it's truly only one search, not multiple searches for that search term in terms of what exists in the wall file. So that's the first piece of nuance there, that it only truly was searched one. And you would have to really dig into that wall file to expose that, but I think it was pertinent to know how many times this was searched.
I'm sorry.
Yes, please.
Stop you there for one moment. And Your Honor, with the court's permission, if I could ask Ms. Gilman to publish Table 2 now.
Okay. Oh, wonderful. May I look at Table 2? Sure. Thank you, Your Honor.
And Ms. Hyde, do you recognize what's up on the screen?
I do. That is Table 2 of my report on page 4.
And if you could, again, using the latest warning that you have before you, direct the jury's attention to what, if anything, is significant is depicted in Table 2 up on the screen.
So Table 2 here is designed to share with us what each of the locations that can potentially have Safari data, what kind of data they hold. And one of the things that many of us are interested in sometimes is, do these things hold our private searches, like if we're in incognito mode in Google or private searching here. So this table denotes if we're seeing private or non-private searches, if it includes tabs that are open or closed, so that we know which artifacts are giving us what kind of information, as well as what some of the associated timestamps mean. So this was designed as a guide to really understand Table 1 more in depth. So this first one here, this refers to the HysteryDB wall file. And that file has non-private searches. It includes closed tabs. And the visit time there is the time that a user reopened the tab. We don't always have the artifacts we want. And in this instance, we did not have that particular one. Then we have the Safari Tabs DB. This has private tabs and non-private tabs. And it shows only tabs that have not been closed. So this is an active tabs database. The next one we have is the Browser State DB and its wall file. And this is the one we were referencing where that we keep talking about, where that 2:27 a.m. number is coming from. So this one is going to be non-private searches. It includes closed tabs, which is important, and the last view time. So when an item went to the background. So it's about the tab, not about the search. That's probably the most important demarcation. And one of the issues here is when the tools parse the data, they call the columns what the columns are called raw in the data. Those don't necessarily tell us what they mean. We have to verify and validate what they actually mean. So when I'm saying last underscore view time, that's what the database name is, not necessarily the actual function, or not what we would presume it to mean. The next one, the last one here, is the mobile Safari plist, and this one actually tells us, the date here gives us the time that something was queried reliably.
Now, if I could ask you, if you could just explain to the jury as far as these SQ or SQLite databases, how exactly do they work, and what, if any, relation do they have with regard to data and information with the write-ahead log of the wall file?
So SQLite databases work and function as a storage for anything that the phone may need to reference later or that you're doing. They're stored for a variety of things. Most of your third-party apps use SQLite databases, and multiple applications do. So SQLite gets information in, and it allows for that information to be updated, added to, or removed from. So data that's in that situation, that it's sitting in the database, that is what we refer to as live data. then data that is waiting to be put into the database that is sitting in the wall or it has been requested to be removed, that is what's in the write-ahead log, and we call that non-live data because it's not in the active database. So when you're using an application and it's putting that data to that temporary storage area, that wall, that write-ahead log, what happens is then when you request data by going into your contacts, let's say, and looking at the people who are stored in your contacts, right? Your mom, your dad, your brother, your sister, all those people. When you're looking at your best friend, you're looking up their numbers, that data is all stored in that database. So when you add someone, it does that entry to the wall. Now, so if I just added Sally, how do I know that Sally's in there, right? Well, what happens is the interpretation of the SQLite database goes to the wall, checks and sees if it's in the wall, and uses the wall to incorporate it together to present you everything as if it's in there. Then when you close the application, you close contacts. You don't just put it away like go switch apps. You actually close it. When it closes, all of those changes get committed. So now the items that you've requested to be deleted, that contact you don't like anymore, that X, whatever, their data is no longer in there. The data that you've added is now in there, and now that's all live. Sometimes we can get more complex and recover some of those items that are left over because they are marked for deletion but still sit in the database, or they're sitting on a page that is no longer active in the database. So there's a lot of places that we can recover data from in addition to the wall that exists in the database after something has happened, but that isn't pertinent to this particular use case.
Now, as far as that sort of interplay between the SQLite database and the wall, what if any sort of, as a forensic examiner, what if any sort of complexities arise out of it?
Oh, one of the biggest complexities is the assumption that because data exists in the write-ahead log, that a user took an action to delete it. When I teach at the university, when I peer review my colleagues' reports, this is one of the most common mistakes I see. And it's really because some of the forensics tools to indicate that the file has been recovered, they put a big X on it. And that was actually a big subject of that standardization of file recovery paper I referenced earlier. And it speaks about all kinds of files, but actually has a special section on SQLite, specifically because that nuance is often missed by examiners.
Now, in reference to that being marked as deleted or misinterpreted as deleted by a user, is there a specific tool of the tools that you mentioned before, as far as Celebrite versus Axiom versus that has that information that others may not?
So Celebrite and Magnet Axiom, both Celebrite Physical Analyzer and Magnet Axiom, both have file system viewers that then have SQLite database viewers. I would say that those SQLite database viewers have more of a basic function in terms of looking at data in the live database. They don't allow for deep analysis of the write-ahead logs, which is why in my analysis I use the specialized Sanderson forensic browser for SQLite.
And so when you see something like that in a Celebrite abstraction, is there what, if any, further analysis do you do to sort of look behind it?
Absolutely. Anytime I see an entry marked as recovered, and I'll use the term recovered instead of deleted, by Celebrite, and the source is a write-ahead log, I would go and begin reconstruction of the write-ahead logs using Sanderson's forensics tool to get to the meat of, is this something that it has been deleted, or is this something that has yet to be written to the database? You can often see remnants of that based on how many unique entries there are of it. What the other thing we do is, so I mentioned that when we have the wall file, it hasn't been applied. So if I take the SQLite database and the wall file out, and I make another copy of them, so I've got one copy I'm looking at Sanderson, and I take another copy and I actually open it, what's cool is it does the commits. So then I have a copy of the database that actually has all those changes. So I now know if the entry was deleted by just comparing the two. So I can do that analysis by basically making the database think it was reopened, by reopening it with a non-forensics tool in that instance, just to see what it would look like in real life. And then I can look at the difference between the two and determine if something was marked for deletion or addition.
Now, are there different reasons from your training, your experience, and your knowledge of these systems? Is there different reasons for why it's your conclusion that that particular search or those search terms were not deleted by the user specifically?
Yeah, well, there's a couple of reasons. First, the way tabs work from a functional perspective, you can close a tab, but there's not really a user deletion function for the tab. And there was no evidence of other deletion, if that makes sense. It doesn't make sense that the term was, I don't see evidence that the term was searched prior to that 624 time. So since the term wasn't searched prior to that 0624 time, the existence of the tab being closed would not mean that that search was deleted, because then it would be evident in the other databases pertaining to the actual search, not the databases pertaining to the state of the tab. Is there a possibility that the tab was closed? Absolutely, but that is not a deletion. Secondly, an existence in the WAL file, as we mentioned, could be that it's something new, not something that was deleted. So just its mere existence in the WAL file doesn't mean it's deleted. I should say that that same X in the tools, you have to check the file because it could be from a free list or a free page, in which case, I know we didn't go into those details, nuance of SQLite databases that actually doesn't pertain to this deleted item. So there's other places where we would expect potential recovery, not necessary in this instance. And you can have something that's in a WAL file and deleted without being in those other locations. Just stating that its existence in a WAL file itself doesn't mean deletion, but there are other SQLite things that would clearly indicate deletion that aren't applicable to this particular search.
Now, Your Honor, with the court's permission, if I could ask Ms. Gilman to publish figure 1 from the HYDE report.
Thank you, Your Honor.
And again, Ms. HYDE, you recognize what's up on the screen?
Yes, this is figure 1. This is a direct screen capture from Sanderson's tool from the browser StateDB, limited to the Haas long to die in cold search.
If you could, using that laser pointer, again, direct your attention to what, if anything, significant or of note that you observed in using the Sanderson tool that's depicted in figure 1.
Absolutely. So all of the searches are the exact same term. And here we have the order index. And here we have that last view time. And by looking at the last view time, which is the raw title of that artifact for the timestamp we were looking at, these are identical. This, and more importantly, are even the actual UUID for these are identical, which is right here. Now the offsets are different, and what that means is that this is just appearing several times in the write-ahead log. It has moved as the database has moved data through the write-ahead log to different positions, but has in every instance the same unique identifier, meaning that all of these entries are the same entry, just shown multiple times in the same database.
And to that point, as far as the multiple times that it's listed within there, what, if any, relationship does that have to how many times it was actually searched by a user?
Well, that UID shows that in this particular instance that it existed once in the last time in the tab, because this artifact does not tell us how many times something was searched by the user. This artifact is limited just to the tab. We would look at the mobile Safari plist, which has one entry for this timestamp, or knowledge CDB, which also only has one entry for this search. Those two locations are where we would determine how many times it had been searched, as opposed to this location, which could tell us that if there were multiple entries, but there is only one. But since this is limited to just the last search that's showing in a tab, it isn't a good source to say how many times was it searched, just not this particular artifact.
But from other artifacts, you were able to determine that?
Absolutely, you can determine that from both mobile Safari plist and knowledge CDB.
And I'm sorry, I jumped in there just as far as turning your attention back to figure 1. What, if anything, else of significance do you know in that?
That's really what's of significance, is that it is the same entry there multiple times, and we can tell by the unique identifier that it is the exact same entry also. And it's, although it's the same search term and the same timestamp, it's only one instance of it, just it's stored in the database multiple times at multiple offsets.
Now, from the timestamp associated with that depicted in this figure, what, if anything, can you say as to the, or what, if anything, were you able to conclude from your analysis as to the time that the website was viewed?
Well, I guess I should really clearly, for people who may not be familiar, that doesn't look like a normal time, right? That's because this is an Apple WebKit timestamp, so we actually convert it to a regular time. But when you look at this number raw, you can actually see that it's consistent throughout, even though you don't know what it is. But if we put it into a decoder, this particular timestamp is where we're getting January 29th, 2022 at 02:47 a.m. And to be clear, just for real clarity, when we actually translate this timestamp, it's in universal time constant, not in local time, but for the sake of conversationalists, I'm using the local time here as opposed to the time in the universal time constant, which is how this artifact is particularly stored.
Now, with your analysis, is there some kind of testing that you conduct, or Can you explain to the jury sort of what that is and how it relates to your analysis?
Absolutely. So with this artifact and being able to determine what this timestamp really means, I actually did quite a bit of testing, which is fun, but that's okay. So we went ahead and took a jailbroken iPhone, and the purpose of a phone being jailbroken is we're bypassing the security protocol so we can monitor the data and its storage in real time and bring the data through. We did this manually in terms of pulling the data out, and we also did multiple forensic images at different stages. We manipulated tabs, we did some Google searches, and then we would close tabs, move tabs, and perform several different searches that we scripted out first, what we were testing, and then checked to see how that timestamp was moving. We even did some really interesting things where we tried. Yes. Okay.
Ms. Hyde, I'm sorry. So you had, I think when you were talking about some of the testing that you had conducted, you used the term lead. There are other individuals that worked on this particular assignment?
I had somebody peer review and test my testing. So they didn't work on the case, but as I was testing, one of my team members just validated that I was following my test plan. That's just normal practice that we use peer review.
So the testing that you were testifying about is testing that you...
I conducted, correct. But I had peer review by my team member on the script I had made to do my testing. So, and I use when I do testing, I'm following the NIST guidelines for data set generation and testing that's outlined by OSAC, which ironically, I should disclose I'm a co-author on.
And then, if you could, I'm sorry, Ms. Hyde, just continue as far as your testing.
Absolutely. Yeah, so then populated the device, and looked at all of the different data that came back from the different states while it was jailbroken, and the changes that happened. What I was saying was interesting is then tied it to a Mac, and saw how the browser state changed if we changed the browser and the tab on a Mac and how that would affect it. And because we could see the differences, and by we, I mean that I had my testing peer reviewed, because I could see the differences of what the data looked like when I was altering it both in the Mac and on the phone, I was getting differences in those timestamps in those different conditions. So in other words, I could get a timestamp that showed in the browser state DB that was earlier than the current search by a variety of means, including manipulating the tabs, closing them, opening them, switching which one was in proper view forward, as well as looking at that tab on an external device, including a Mac and an iPad on the same account.
Now, throughout the course of your work, I think you alluded to it earlier in your testimony as far as your experience is concerned. You've had occasion to work both as a forensic, forensic extractions, forensic investigator.
Yes.
As well as working also in research and development, is that correct?
Correct.
And so from the R&D side, what, if any, role does that play as far as your analysis in general terms and your analysis here when it came to some of the devices or some of the things, the tools that you were implementing?
I believe that my experience in research, development, and reverse engineering throughout my career pertaining to artifacts, of course, influences and my analysis processes in terms of wanting to ensure I understand how things work. I think it actually gives me a better understanding in many ways of how data moves through devices, as well as how understanding why the tools parse and represent data the way they do, in terms of the fact that they are presenting the data as they parse it using the proper algorithms to dissect that data and determine what it is based on testing and knowledge. So I think it actually influences in a positive way the depth that I go through in my analysis.
You had mentioned earlier in your testimony that you had reviewed both Trooper Greeno's report as well as an affidavit from Mr. Green. Is that correct?
Correct.
And with regard to the affidavit from Mr. Green, what, if any, issues of significance did you observe in his analysis?
In Mr. Green's analysis, there is a conclusion that is drawn that a search occurred at 02:47 a.m. on January 29th, based on the artifact recovered from browser state DB that Celebrite parses. And there are two errors with that. The assumption that is the time of the search is a misunderstanding of the browser state DB artifact, because that artifact is not the time of search, it's the time of movement of the tab, as well as the statement that it was deleted due to the demarcation of Celebrite as recovered.
And based on the totality of your analysis, your testing, and everything that you looked at in this case, what, if any, conclusions did you come to?
My conclusion is that there was a search at 02:47 a.m. for Hawk Mock Sports. That browser was in use, and there were continual searches due through the night. The phone was, I do agree with Mr. Green's findings that the phone was in use at that time at 02:27. Later, the phone a web search is done at 6:23 a.m. For how long. At that moment, Apple produces a suggestion for how long to digest food. The search is instead completed with how long TI, die, and CKLD at 6:23. A new search is conducted at 6:24 of HOS, long to die and cold, HOS, long to die and cold. That search is then the last search that is made in that particular tab. And that's my conclusion.
What, if any, conclusion did you come to in regard to items being deleted pertaining to those artifacts you were looking at?
In regards to those artifacts pertaining to those search terms, I had no evidence of deletion.
I have a moment, Your Honor.
Yes.
Your Honor, may we approach? All right, the court, please.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Please watch your step.